starting with a clip, if that's queued up.
I think the media has treated us completely unfairly. They came to our town expecting us to throw these rallies and, you know, march for our lives and lay on the ground and with posters, you know, like, that's not what we're doing. We don't want to wait around and protest for change. We want change, but we don't want outsiders coming in and forcing it upon us.
It was a boy who stole his dad's guns. And I know that some of them are advocating for people to lock up guns, but I feel like locking up guns would go against the Second Amendment, even if it's in your house. I feel like it's an infringement because if you have a burglar come in, what are you going to tell them? Like, hold on, like, there's a burglar, let me go get my gun out of the safe.
Most of everybody here has grown up with guns or seen a gun or shot a gun.
Most everybody knows how to shoot a gun. They know, like, the #1 rule, you know, don't point it at anyone, don't even pick it up, act like it's always got ammunition in it.
Guns, yes, have been used to do some awful things, but guns don't kill people. People kill people.
This boy tried making bombs. If there were bombs that gone off, you blame the bomber. If there's a drunk driver accident, you blame the drunk driver. You blame the person, you blame the human. But if it's a shooter, you blame the gun. And that's what society is doing here.
You don't have to be okay with guns. But I guess you have to respect that people are.
Well, thanks everyone so much for joining us today. We know that you know how important the issue of school safety is. So many of you have kids and grandkids that are in the public school system. I know I have 2 little kids that will soon be in the public school system. So thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. I'm going to introduce our panelists now. They're not in order, but I'm going to start with Laura Carno, who's right here in the middle. She's the founder of Faster Colorado, an organization that trains school staff members to be armed on campus. She actually raises private funds for these classes, as most districts don't have the budget for this training. Kelsey Harkness, to my right, is the senior news producer at the Daily Signal and the co-host of the Problematic Women Facebook Live show. And she's interviewed everyone from teachers to administrators to students who have been affected by school shootings and covered the issue from the angle of media bias and misinformation. And that video was actually one that Kelsey produced, and we're going to see a little more of that in just a moment. And Bob Schaefer is the headmaster of Liberty Common School and the chairman of the leadership program of the Rockies, as well as a former Colorado member of Congress. He has also recently written about many prevention and preparation tactics schools can take to be safe, focusing on parental responsibility. So we're going to focus on several topics today, including the myths and realities of what it means to be an armed teacher or an armed school, the media bias in reporting on school shootings, and what are other things schools and parents can be doing to keep kids safe. So I'm going to kick it off with Laura. And Laura, we wanted to ask you, as someone who has founded this organization that's training teachers and getting education out there about how we can keep schools safe, what are some of the myths that are out there regarding arming schools and arming teachers? Because I feel like people don't know what that means and they get scared, and so let's clear up some of those things.
Sure. So some of the biggest myths out there are #1, that teachers don't want to be armed on campus, and the second myth is that anybody would force a school staff member to be armed. So you hear this in the words of you can't make teachers carry guns. And just like anywhere where concealed carry is legal, it would be the same as saying concealed carry is legal. Everybody must carry a firearm. That's just ridiculous, and nowhere in the country is that happening. And then that other myth of teachers don't want to be armed. And I'll take a step back. In our experience between Colorado and Ohio in the program that we have here, with over 1,600 school staff, by the way, we have a pretty decent sample size. about 60% of the folks are actually administrators and not teachers. So when we think of quote unquote armed teachers, think of armed school staff that does include teachers for sure, but also coaches and janitors and principals and so forth. So those would be the two big myths that are absolutely not true.
Right, and a lot of people don't realize that there's actually already 14 states where teachers and administrators are already able to be armed and are armed, you just don't know about it. And there are about 32 states where they're on the path to lawful arming. So, I mean, I guess that's just to say that this is happening and nothing bad is coming of that. In fact, they're keeping students safe. There was actually a story in Maryland recently where a teacher or a guard actually stopped a school shooting from happening. And then to touch on some of the other prevention measures in my home state of Indiana, there was recently a attempted school shooting where the teacher, who was a former pro football player, actually stopped the shooter through physical force. So there's a lot of things we should be thinking about here. And Laura, I also wanted to ask you, what are some of the most common fears you're hearing from those who are speaking out against this?
Yeah, you know, school safety is a really interesting topic. Some people think that this is political, and maybe on the two ends, on the left and the right, among people who pay a lot of attention to politics, it might be a political feel. But I will tell you from talking to dozens and dozens of parents for a couple of years, but specifically lots of them since the Parkland shooting, parents just want their child to return home to them alive every single day. Not most days, every single day. And to these parents, it is absolutely not a political issue for them. It's a matter of safety. So when it's their kid or their grandkid involved, I'm a grandma now, I think about it a little bit differently. When it's their kid or grandkid involved, they are willing to say, gosh, I might have thought this other way about gun control before, but now that it's my kid, what is going to keep him or her alive and safe and not lose their innocence in school, right? So I would say the fear, is my kid going to be safer or less safe with armed staff is the biggest fear. And I think that based on what we know, somebody there on campus to stop the bad guy as soon as the incident starts, as opposed to waiting for law enforcement, that is going to keep kids safer. So that would be the biggest fear. People just want to know, is my kid going to be safer or less safe?
Yeah, and one powerful statistic that I found while doing research with this is that 90% of mass shootings take place in a gun-free zone. And to me, that is just such a telling statistic that makes me want to, keep schools as safe as possible by using armed guards. Kelsey, let's move on to you. I think we're going to actually show the second clip of your documentary before we get to your questions, if you guys have that queued up.
I think everyone knows that the media portrays a certain political agenda that they choose to go with. It's not a political agenda that the majority of Santa Fe adheres to. I want all schools safe. That's it. We can agree to disagree on how to go about doing it. I'm open to different solutions. Our schools have to be safe.
I think we need to lock doors. This door that he came in was a bus entrance that was unlocked.
I can tell you I've thought long and hard about the arming of teachers. I don't think that's the end all by any stretch. I don't think it's the magic answer. But I will say this, I truly wanted that pistol in my hand. Now, just speaking generally for me, I would do whatever training is involved. I would do that. That would not be an issue. I think, quite frankly, that it could be done in a very safe manner. I think the weapons could be stored in a safe manner. All that would have to be done, but let's face it, it's another line of defense against evil.
All right, so Kelsey, you went down to Santa Fe, you interviewed teachers, you interviewed students, administrators. You've been in the middle of this. And what's so interesting is we were talking about, we heard so much about the Parkland shooting. You went down to Santa Fe, you were talking to people afterwards, and they said, why'd you go to Santa Fe? Because nobody was talking about it. So tell us a little bit about what you learned from talking with people that were directly involved in that particular situation.
Well, first off, I want to echo what Laura said. The issue of school safety and school shootings is not a partisan issue. Everyone wants to keep our students safe. And I think many in the media and many on the left who are calling for gun control and gun reform are trying to put this wedge between both sides when really nobody's against keeping our students safe. We just have different means of going about that. So I've been reporting on this issue throughout the past year. One of my first trips was actually to Colorado to learn about how the process of arming teachers and staff administrators actually works, and through that I was able to meet Laura and learn about the amazing program that she is spearheading in Colorado. Sadly, after that, yet another school shooting happened. This time it was in Santa Fe, Texas. It was interesting because everybody knows about Parkland, everybody knows what happened there, and everybody knows about the student activists there. When I told people, friends, that I'm traveling down to Santa Fe for my next documentary, they asked, why are you going to Santa Fe? Nobody even realized there was a school shooting there. It hardly got any media attention. You didn't hear from any of the students. You didn't hear from any of the teachers. And because I view my role as telling other people's story, I wanted to bring my phone and let some of these students speak for themselves and read a text message that I got from Grace Johnson, one of the students who you just saw in that video describe what happened there. And how she wants to be an advocate for change, but she is not able to have a voice because nobody in the media will listen to her. So this was just this week. I asked her permission to share this text with the audience. She said, if I can do what Kyle Kashrub does, he's from one of the lone Second Amendment supporters out of Parkland. Sorry, is my mic still on? So she said, if I can do what Kyle does, then Santa Fe won't be forgotten like we already have been. I've tried working at a local level, but it's not working because I'm young, and nobody is speaking out for Santa Fe. Yes, we kicked the media out, and we kicked the media out because they didn't want to talk about politics or change. They only wanted videos of us crying. Wow. That broke my heart. Absolutely broke my heart, because when I was down there, and you can watch the full, it's a 15-minute video I put together, which usually my videos that I produce for the Daily Signal are about 4 to 5 minutes long. I had to make this 15 minutes long because they have a story to tell and nobody's told it. Luckily, I have a news organization, the Heritage Foundation, behind me to support that. So it is a long video, but it really is worth watching because their story is not out there. And what she told me is that as she was actually in hiding, she had CNN and reaching out to her. They found her location on Twitter, reaching out to her, asking to explain what happened. As soon as they were evacuated, she walked past dead bodies, by the way. She stepped on her classmates' blood. Absolutely traumatizing, traumatic. This should not happen to anyone. As soon as she got out, bombarded by media for the next week or two, wanting their sob stories, wanting those stories. And then they left because the media very quickly learned that Santa Fe supports the Second Amendment, and they don't blame guns, they blame the shooter. And what's so wrong about that is that we can disagree on guns, but the students and the teachers from Santa Fe are calling for a lot of change. They have platforms. They've started nonprofits. One of them is called Hearts United for Kindness. Nobody knows about that simply because they support the Second Amendment. So there's so much media bias out there. These students are being ignored, and there's so much misinformation about how the process of actually arming students and, not students, arming teachers and administrators actually works, and the number of programs they have to go through in order to be able to conceal carry in the classroom. In one school district I interviewed in Oklahoma, they have higher standards than police officers because that school district decided if you are ever forced to pull out your gun in a school in that type of situation, you're not a normal police officer. You have a backdrop of students who did nothing wrong behind you. So they actually want those teachers and administrators to have higher standards than even a police officer. But nobody knows that because the media won't report it.
And for both Laura and Kelsey, and if you have a comment, Bob, please jump in. We've talked a little bit about how teachers are going through training through your program, but nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to out themselves, so to speak, because there could be very real consequences from their communities. And Kelsey, you said it's hard to get those stories out there for that reason. Can you guys talk a little bit about the personal side of the teachers and the staff that you've spoken with, maybe you specifically, Laura, that are doing this and why they're doing this?
Yeah, and actually I drove up from Denver this morning. We have a class going on right now. I'll be driving back as soon as we're done here to go back and join the class. There is no shortage of these folks who want to be able to save kids. They're already willing to die for their children. Every one of these people say, I will take a bullet for my kid. What they're not willing to do is have their name out, and this is for the most part, have their name out there. So some schools, we would never know that they had armed staff to read the news. Some schools have huge, 4 by 8 foot signs in their parking lot that say we have armed staff. They think that's a deterrent. So there is that, it sort of runs the gamut. For the most part, even with a school that publicizes that they have an armed campus, most of them, a vast, vast majority, don't reveal the names of the school staff members. And why is that? They don't want those individuals to be on a kill list. We've heard a lot about kill lists with these bad guys. An exception, a guy who came through our class in June, had done some national media, and I asked him, I said, so what was behind your decision to do this? And he said, honestly, if somebody's gonna come in here to kill kids, I want them coming to me first. And I went, okay, that's a different way to go. But for the most part, they don't want to be, they don't want their names out there. The other thing, if you want to think about it this way, the fact that a person is armed at all, has a concealed carry permit at all, isn't really popular conversation in the teacher's lounge. Not every person that works in a school campus is in favor of that policy. And so some folks, even that already has an armed staff program, they don't even want to talk to other people on the campus who aren't part of that armed security team, because they just don't want to get the flack back from what these people might think about the fact that their school took that policy.
And we are going to transition a little bit to some of the things that Bob has been focusing on. Arming teachers and staff is certainly, one way to keep schools safe, but there are a lot of other things that you can do too that people aren't talking about, because this is such a hot topic that I think that the other precautions and preventionary measures that schools and parents can take are kind of getting swept under the rug. So, Bob, can you talk to us a little bit about some of those things that you've written about and talked about regarding what parents can do and what schools can do outside of this?
Sure. First of all, on every table is an article that I wrote about school safety for a school safety publication. And don't read it now. You can't read that and listen to us at the same time, but take it with you. There's some good instruction in there about prevention, preparation, response, and recovery are the four main areas that we talk about when we talk about school safety as a school principal or as school administrators. My bottom line message is this. It is a harrowing experience for parents to drop their little children off at a school that somebody else owns and runs and manages to go to school, and for the things that you expect happen at school. That can be terrifying when you drop that little child off at the curb and say, go in there and we'll see you later, right? It's another thing to be confronted with the emotion and the stories and the pictures that we hear from time to time when something goes wrong and there's a violent episode at school where you are not there and somebody else is in charge of that facility and you can't help. This is a terrible proposition for a great number of things, school security more than anything else. The message is, there is no government worker, politician, school administrator, teacher, school security officer that has a greater responsibility to protect your child than you do. This is your child. It is not somebody else's responsibility to teach them. You may hire somebody to help you teach your child. That's what schools are. That's what teachers properly are. And in the same context, it is not somebody else's responsibility to keep your child safe. You might ask them to assist you in a school or out on the street, but ultimately it's your responsibility. So you need to, as a parent or grandparent, be unwilling. You need to be a legitimate American here. You need to be unwilling to defer all that authority to some government worker. And And you must translate that God-given American authority for yourself and your family and for your child to be bold enough to ask tough questions, to walk through a school and look at things that are just common sense. If that school was built in the 60s or 70s, I guarantee it's got recessed doorways, blind corners, hiding places, and you need to ask at some point in time, is anybody going to do something about this? Is there a plan to get it fixed? Can we get some mirrors up there so that we can eliminate some of these kinds of things? You need to ask questions. Has every phone in this school been tested to make sure that when someone dials 911, the address to the school pops up on the dispatcher screen? Because that doesn't always happen. These are common things. All right, you can go through the article and find 100 different things that you might want to ask your school about. The bottom line is, you need to be proactive enough to make sure that the school is safe before you are willing to hand your child off to this government institution, typically. And if it does not meet your satisfaction and for your own sense of school safety, I mean, my gosh, you're an American. Send your child to a school that earns your trust. You do not have to accept the school that your school district assigns to you based on your address.
And some of the other things that you've written about are having adult volunteers, anonymous tip lines, strategies for passing along strange behavior. You mentioned the architecture, the mirrors, and all that. Are you seeing people actually doing these things?
Yes, absolutely.
And are they working?
Yes. Schools should be crawling with parents. Schools that tell parents you're not welcome or come up with reasons why they shouldn't be volunteering are dangerous schools. They're creating a vacuum that invites all kinds of negative things to occur. Violence is just one of them. Yes, we should be creating cultures in schools. This is a part of good administration. Mega campuses are dangerous places typically. Smaller schools where the administrators and teachers know the names of every one of those children are eminently safer. Administrators should be as knowledgeable about their school that they recognize when a child's behavior is different, maybe in a way that would suggest at least needs some follow-up questioning to make sure Johnny's not a danger to himself or let alone other people. When schools get way too big and way too bureaucratic, you miss that opportunity, that exchange with children and families. But the culture within the school is important as well. And it starts with the little things. Dress codes, discipline policies, virtues and values that are not just celebrated and up on the wall, but practiced and implemented as a function of curriculum in the classroom. When those things occur, children care about one another. And you need that kind of culture within a school. They're only at school a certain part of time. They're communicating with each other on social media and texting one another, and you have to create a culture in schools where children are inclined to realize, or educated well enough to realize when there are dangerous conversations taking place, when kids are expressing violent inclinations, and they're willing to come and talk to their teacher, their administrator, counselor, even a parent. And 9 times out of 10, when law enforcement or school administrators are able to intervene and prevent a dangerous episode, it is usually that kind of environment that has allowed an openness of communication among students and families to say, all right, I don't want to. Last year, in the middle of the hallway, changing passes, it was final exam week. One of the students says, boy, this sure would be a great, he didn't want to go to the next test class. He wasn't prepared for the test. He actually said this would be, and it was right after one of the school shootings in the country. He said, jokingly, stupidly, but jokingly, this would be a great time for a school shooting, right? 2 kids race down to the principal's office and say, name the kid, here's what he said. I don't think he was serious, but here's what he said. You're the adult, can you take it from there? We called the police, we interviewed the kid, we knew he was joking, but you still take that seriously. He said the words that warrant a discussion. Now the policy is a nice thing. The police responded beautifully. His parents were in the school. It was all. The question is, what was it that created the scenario where those 2 friends knew it was important to come down and tell us, even though they suspected it was a joke, to tell us that those words had been uttered in their school? And the answer is, it was the culture that was created in that campus. And this is not hard to do. You must demand that that kind of culture exists where you send your kids to school.
And Bob, and if you have questions, please, you can put them on the note cards, just a reminder.
Just to add very briefly on that, you mentioned culture and how important that is. I'm going to ask the audience a question that I don't have the answer to, but I think it's one that is not being asked because it's inconvenient and it's uncomfortable. But why are all of these most recent strings of school shootings happening in public schools and not private schools?
That's right.
Do we want to, did you want someone to actually answer that?
Well, just to build on that, again, I don't have the full answer. I think I think everyone in this room might have some ideas when we talk about bureaucracy and accountability. But I think that an important thread to this whole conversation about school safety is also school choice and empowering parents to be able to pull their children out of a school if they don't think that that school is capable of keeping their children safe. Another topic that I've done a lot of reporting on is the issue of school bullying. And a lot of people think bullying is only a cultural issue, but there are actually policies that were handed down by the Obama administration that basically built in quotas and discouraged administrators and teachers from reporting bullying because they didn't want minority students to be suspended, expelled, or punished at a disproportionate rate compared to white students. And as a result, we've seen through statistics that bullying has gotten worse and worse, and parents are being forced to pull their children out of school. I interviewed one family in Maryland. Their son, 3rd-grade-year-old son, is suicidal because of bullying, and nobody in the school is holding them accountable. I also think when it comes to arming teachers in schools, if you are a parent who really is uncomfortable with that idea, then you should have the right to choose a school that isn't arming teachers. But if I'm a parent who doesn't feel comfortable sending my child to a school that doesn't have armed teachers who are willing to take a bullet and protect my child, I should have a right to make that decision as well.
Yeah, I think you're so right about the school choice. That was kind of exactly what I was thinking when Bob was talking. I mean, that's such an important aspect of giving parents, empowering parents to make the decisions they feel are best for their children. And as we know, parents are the best people to make those decisions. So I am going to go ahead and go to some questions.
Can I add one thing to the parents discussion, because I talked to an awful lot of parents about this. And if you think about what we saw on TV on the day of Sandy Hook, on the day of Parkland, one of the things the media loves to show is the look of anguish, utter anguish, on the looks of these parents' faces when they show up to the campus. They don't know if their child is alive or dead. They know that even if their child is alive, they will never be the same. They have lost their innocence forever. And so parents here in my state, when they called after Parkland to say, how do I prevent this from happening? They don't want to be that parent. We had the exact conversation that Bob was talking about. They feel like when an administrator says to them, our kids at our school are safe enough, we don't need to even talk about the policy of armed staff. And some of these parents, and it breaks my heart, they say, what am I going to do? It's the superintendent. And I say, you know what you do? That is your child. You are in charge of the safety, education, all of that of your child. You tell them if they aren't even open to having this conversation, if they aren't willing to answer all of these questions, you take your kid out and you bring them to a school that meets your safety standards, period. And it's interesting because sometimes it's the first time a parent has heard like the words that Bob said, that this is your kid. You hire people to educate your kid, but it is your job as a parent to do that. And it's turning the cube, I think, a little bit for some parents who've never really thought about it this way. And it's pretty fascinating to see this issue get people thinking about, oh, my kid, my responsibility, even though there's been decades and decades of government school telling us something different.
And one point I actually wanted to make was one thing that really stood out to me as we were discussing this beforehand was just that it can take up to 20 minutes for police to arrive on the scene at a rural school district. And I think that's something people maybe aren't considering sometimes when they're thinking about this stuff. What do you hear from people that are opponents of the movement to arm schools when they hear this kind of reality? Are you hearing any arguments against that or anything like that?
Yeah, and sometimes it's even up to 45 minutes in some rural school districts. Most of these events are over in 3 to 5 minutes. So you're not immune in a suburban district or an urban district either. So that math holds. What's interesting is, I offer to debate anybody on this topic. That's one of the things that they have difficulty with, because we have the question, would you rather somebody stop a massacre from happening right there on scene when it starts, or would you like to sit and wait for law enforcement to come, whether it's 3 minutes or 30 minutes? And it's one of those tough things they don't have an answer for. Usually the retort is, we need to talk more about mental illness, we need to talk more about not allowing people with mental illness or young people to get firearms. We all agree on that. Nobody here wants an underage person having a firearm they are not equipped to handle. I'm not talking about going hunting with one's family. And everybody agrees that we don't want mentally ill people getting firearms. Flat out, we can all agree. But please, let's address this issue of, there's a statistic out there that in most of these, when you average them out, it's sad we have so many statistics, that one person can be shot, not necessarily killed, but shot every 17 seconds. If it is your kid right next to where this thing starts, and the cop is sitting in the parking lot, how many 17-second intervals are you okay with? And if it's my grandkid, I go with 0. I want somebody right there, right then, and it's a tough thing that the other side just doesn't have a good response to.
And on that front, we've talked a lot about the issue of fairness today. And I would say one thing that I think is really unfair when it comes to the issue of arming teachers is the left conflating people's passion and excitement for the Second Amendment with people's passion or excitement for arming teachers. The truth is, you do this for a living. You wish you didn't have to do this for a living. I wish I didn't have to report on this for a living. The fact of the matter is, school shootings are happening. They're problematic, and we need to solve them. And arming teachers is one piece of this very complicated puzzle.
Right, and talking about it is part of that. One of the big things that Steamboat has been pushing is just having conversations. And not everyone in this room has to agree that that's the way to go either, but that's why we're talking about it. So I want to move to questions. First question is, and this could be for anyone that wants to pick it, what are your thoughts on campus carry on college campus, and how do we get states and universities to allow it? What about private schools as well?
So I'll take it from a Colorado standpoint. We have allowed campus carry on college campuses for a great number of years. There have been 0 negative incidents. These are adults. If you're over 21 in Colorado, you can have a concealed carry permit. There are lots of things that people said, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? None of them have happened. And it's one of those things where you say, do you trust law-abiding citizens, just ordinary citizens, not law enforcement, law-abiding citizens to be in charge of their own self-defense And does that change when they walk on a college campus, whether they're a student or they go there for some sort of an event? Is that okay with you? Do you trust them, or should it only be members of law enforcement? And time and time again, every situation where ordinary people can make that decision for themselves, we're not seeing these bad things happening, and on the contrary, we're actually seeing crime go down because the bad guys, they don't want to die in the course of their bad guy life. And when they know that there's a place where folks can be armed, they're much less likely to commit their crimes. The weekend that the NRA has their annual meeting, wherever it is across the country, there's always a report a week or two later in the paper saying record low crime. You know why? Because the bad guys go somewhere else. They want to go. They don't want to die in the course of being a bad guy.
All right, next question. This may be one for you, Bob. What can students do to ensure their own protection, and how do we make sure that we have a voice? How do we make sure that we have a voice even though we're not able to vote, essentially, is the question.
Depending on the age, college campus is one thing. You're adults, you're off on your own, you're responsible for your own safety and security, and the institution to a reasonable degree as well. When you're a child, yes, you want to, as you get older and mature, you acquire more and more ability and the wherewithal to think about protecting and defending yourself. Children should not have to think about this on an hour-to-hour, day-to-day basis. This is not really for, children should know they are safe. And schools have to take the efforts to project that. And the question was asked, how do you answer? There's great debate about this. When somebody asks, are there armed teachers and administrators in your school? There's great debate on how to answer that question. I'll tell you how we answer it, and that is we try to avoid answering it. This is America. We live in the West. The same answer for the school is the same answer for you. You probably ought to assume everybody in the room is armed, right? Just assume that. An armed society is a polite society. We deserve respect. I'm willing to protect what's mine and myself and my family anytime, wherever I can. So you assume what that means. Don't mess with me, please. Okay? Okay? You should. Now we should, and then let's be friends. That's the way we conduct ourselves as individuals. At our school, we have the same institutional answer. We are prepared to defend ourselves. We are prepared to fight back on behalf of our students. Are we armed? Not saying. Just assume you should assume every school is. That's the way it ought to be. Last time you were on an airplane, did you have a federal air marshal on the plane? You don't know. You assume you might have. That would be a good thing for everybody in society to think about when they think of schools. Unfortunately, the laws and rules, I mean, you know this about most schools already, and so do bad guys. 99% of schools in America are gun-free zones, right? You're not going to, it's unlikely somebody's going to fire back at you on most school campuses throughout the country. So it'd be better if all of us together, students included, help project the notion that this is a school where we're safe, our teachers are prepared to protect and defend us, and students to protect themselves. By the way, I don't know if curriculum matters. If kids are not exposed to great books, they underappreciate the value of human life and the relationship between individuals. If there's an inability to even discuss among yourselves as private student citizens your spiritual life, you are pushing out of the school a conversation that is very important in how kids relate to one another and look out for one another and protect and defend one another. And so students, you need to fight for values, virtues, open conversations in your school campuses. If you're older students and into that sort of thing, third graders, you're not understanding what I'm talking about, right? And you just need to look out for one another. That's the best way to protect one another. And when kids are bereft of good, solid curriculum that helps to train them about what a real American is, about the value of human life, as I say, about epic stories, whether it's a tragedy or a triumph. If they don't know those sorts of things, then they can't imagine quickly how to respond to a student in crisis or a violent situation that unfolds right in front of them. Kids who are well-educated and intelligent, they know what to do. We just need more smart kids in America.
Did you want to add one more comment?
To address that question from the media perspective, I will say there is a dire need for more students to speak up. And I think it's a very challenging environment for them to do so, because we look at the student activists from Parkland and the marches that they're putting on. You are against a wave of students. You are not in the culturally popular point of view. And so I give the girls that I interviewed here so much credit for their bravery in being willing to put themselves out there. I sadly read the comments on these videos, and we have people commenting about their weight. This is the type of thing they put up with by putting themselves out there. So it's not easy to do, but for any students who are willing to get in this fight, I will say we do need voices, and some of the ways I would suggest going about doing that are getting involved with some of these organizations like Turning Point, which you'll hear from right after us. Also get involved with the nonprofits that students from Santa Fe are starting, and just get on Twitter and be a voice and put yourself out there as someone who's willing to give a different perspective to the media, because we do need to hear from you.
And I would suggest you all start by grabbing Kelsey's video on Facebook. It's on the Daily Signal Facebook page. I believe it's the most recent video up there. And share it, because that's the whole thing. We got to get the stories out there. Obviously, the media are not covering the students in Santa Fe, and so that's up to us to get the story out there. And it has over 1 million views right now, and that's only like 4 days in. So we're doing a good job so far. So thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So much. Good job. Thank you. All right. What a great panel. What a great panel. What a great panel. Yeah. Okay. There we go.